But Anthony was restless, telling other early morning surfers that the real waves were beyond the crowded spots, despite the area being adjacent to a massive seal rookery at Point Conception. On that fateful morning, Anthony set out early, carrying his 6'2" shortboard and minimal safety gear. He signed the beach access log, indicating he planned to surf the main break. But somewhere along the way, Anthony spotted what looked like perfect waves breaking further offshore. Despite the prominent warning signs about marine life in the area, Anthony paddled out about 150 yards from shore to position himself in the lineup. The area was beautiful, almost too beautiful to resist, with seals barking in the distance and crystal clear water revealing the sandy bottom below. While setting up for the perfect wave, Anthony suddenly noticed something that should have alarmed him. The water was unusually quiet, with no other surfers in sight, and the seals had stopped their constant chatter. But he was so focused on catching the wave of the day that Anthony ignored these warning signs. Finally, Anthony positioned himself perfectly in the lineup and was sitting on his board, legs dangling in the water. Then, suddenly, a terrifying silence fell over the ocean. Out of nowhere, there it was, a massive great white shark emerging from the depths, maybe 20 feet below where Anthony was sitting. What Anthony didn't realize was that he had entered the domain of one of nature's most efficient predators. Great whites are living fossils that have remained virtually unchanged for millions of years. Their torpedo-shaped bodies are perfectly designed for explosive attacks. These apex predators can detect blood from up to 500 yards away and sense the electrical impulses of a beating heart from several meters distance. When hunting, great whites approach from the depths in explosive bursts of speed, exceeding 35 miles per hour, using the element of surprise to deliver devastating attacks with bite forces reaching up to 4,000 pounds per square inch. Anthony reacted instantly, but there was nowhere to run. The massive predator struck from directly below, covering the distance between them in a split second. Anthony managed to see the shark's massive form just before impact. The attack came with such explosive force that both he and his surfboard were launched into the air. The sound of Anthony's screams cut through the morning silence as the shark's jaws clamped down on his torso. He fought desperately, punching at the predator's snout as it held him in its powerful grip, the massive head shaking violently as razor-sharp teeth sliced through flesh and bone. The great white released Anthony after several seconds, typical behavior for these predators when encountering unfamiliar prey. But the damage was already catastrophic. Blood immediately began clouding the pristine water as Anthony, despite his severe injuries, began paddling frantically towards shore on his damaged board. The shark circled below, following the blood trail but maintaining its distance, waiting to see if this strange prey would weaken enough to approach safely. Anthony managed to cover nearly half the distance to shore, his movements becoming weaker and more erratic as blood loss and shock overwhelmed his system. A jogger on the beach heard Anthony's desperate screams and immediately called for help. But the remote location meant rescue was still minutes away. By the time lifeguards arrived, Anthony had disappeared beneath the surface, the ocean swallowing him whole. 2 hours later, Anthony's mangled surfboard washed ashore, bearing the unmistakable crescent-shaped bite marks of a great white shark. The massive gouges told the story of an encounter with one of nature's most efficient predators. Anthony's body was never recovered, despite extensive search efforts. The university established a memorial scholarship in his name, and Surf Beach was temporarily closed while marine biologists studied great white activity in the area. The attack led to enhanced warning systems and additional safety briefings for surfers. As the sun set over the California coastline, the memory of Anthony White served as a stark reminder. There are places in the ocean where even the most experienced fishermen can become prey. The situation was becoming dangerous, and David knew he had to act fast. He'd heard warnings from other captains about unusual activity in the area, but such warnings were common. The water was murky from recent storms, making it harder to see what might be lurking below. He'd fished these waters for years without incident. With his clients growing nervous, David made a fateful decision. He stripped down and dove overboard to manually reset the anchor, hoping to stabilize their position while he fixed the engine. What David didn't know was that he had entered the hunting grounds of one of the Gulf's most dangerous predators, the bull shark. These sharks are incredibly adaptable killers, equally at home in saltwater and freshwater. They can swim far up rivers and into freshwater lakes, places other sharks can't survive. They're aggressive, willing to investigate anything in their territory, making them responsible for more unprovoked attacks on humans than any other species, except great whites, with a bite force of 1,250 lbs per square inch and electroreceptors that can detect electrical fields from meters away. They strike multiple times with the tenacity of a pit bull until their prey stops moving. David worked underwater to free the stuck anchor, but the current was stronger than expected, and the anchor was wedged in debris. A 7-foot bull shark had been patrolling the fishing grounds, drawn by the chumslick from David's successful charter. The predator's acute senses detected the electrical fields generated by David's rapidly beating heart and the scent of blood from hundreds of yards away. What happened next was shockingly fast. David never saw the shark coming through the murky water. It struck from behind, its massive jaws clamping down on his leg with crushing force, before immediately releasing and circling for another attack. The impact was so violent that David's clients heard his muffled scream through the water. He fought desperately to reach the surface, but the bull shark continued its relentless assault. True to their species' aggressive nature, the predator struck again and again, each bite tearing away more flesh. The shark's persistence was terrifying. Once committed to an attack, bull sharks rarely give up, continuing until their prey stops moving. The multiple attacks created a feeding frenzy, and the murky water became a churning mass of blood and violence. David's clients watched in horror as the water around their boat turned red. They screamed for help and radioed the Coast Guard, but David had already disappeared beneath the surface, overwhelmed by the bull shark's relentless assault. The Coast Guard arrived nearly an hour later, finding only David's torn shorts floating in blood-stained water. The bull shark had vanished into the murky depths, leaving behind only traumatic memories for the 4 witnesses. There's a story they tell in every boating safety course along the Texas coast. A cautionary tale. It's about a charter business that vanished along with a man named David. His body was never recovered, swallowed by the Gulf, a place where bull sharks hunt in murky shallows. But thousands of miles away, in Hawaii, another predator was about to show why it's earned the most terrifying nickname in the ocean. This time, it would happen under the cover of darkness, where even paradise becomes a hunting ground. The evening of April 22, 2016, brought perfect conditions to the remote coastline near Hana, Maui. A gentle trade wind rustled through the palm trees as the sun painted the sky. A 24-year-old named Christian Smith couldn't have asked for better conditions for his solo fishing adventure at one of his secret spots along Maui's untouched coastline. He embodied the laid-back Hawaiian lifestyle. Friends described him as fearless and independent, always venturing to remote locations that other anglers avoided. That evening, Christian loaded his truck, choosing a breathtakingly beautiful but completely isolated location, a secluded beach accessible only by a rough dirt road winding through dense tropical vegetation. He arrived just as darkness was settling. The spot was perfect. A protected cove with deep water close to shore, and a coral reef that attracted schools of baitfish during night hours. He set up his gear methodically, preparing for the monsters that prowled these waters after sunset. As Christian waded into about 6 feet of crystal-clear water to cast beyond the reef break, everything seemed perfect. He could see the white sand bottom, even in starlight, and he'd already landed 2 nice fish when disaster struck. Moving through the water to reposition, Christian's foot slipped on wet volcanic rock. He fell hard against sharp coral formations, opening a deep gash on his leg. Blood immediately began streaming into the pristine water around him. Local fishermen had warned about increased predator activity at night, but Christian had fished these waters countless times. What he didn't know was that the remote location had become a hunting ground for one of the ocean's most dangerous predators. As Christian tried to assess his injury in the dim light, he realized the cut was deeper than expected. His splashing and the metallic scent of blood created the perfect storm of stimuli. Unbeknownst to him, he had attracted the attention of Hawaii's apex predator. Tiger sharks are perfectly adapted for nighttime hunting in both shallow and deep waters, earning the nickname "wastebasket of the sea," because they'll eat virtually anything. Their stomachs have contained license plates, tires, even other sharks. These massive sharks can grow up to 18 feet long and possess an indiscriminate appetite, making them particularly deadly at night when they move into shallow water to hunt. They can detect blood from several hundred yards away, and their lateral line system senses the slightest vibrations in the water, making escape nearly impossible once they lock onto a target. Christian began wading toward shore, but his movements became increasingly erratic as blood loss affected his coordination. The coral cut was more serious than he'd thought, and the metallic scent drifting through the water was like ringing a dinner bell for every predator in the area. The 10-foot tiger shark had been patrolling the reef edge when Christian's blood trail reached its sensitive nostrils. Unlike more cautious reef sharks, Tiger sharks are known for their bold, reckless approach to anything in their territory, especially during nighttime hunting hours, when they become most active. Christian never saw death coming through the dark water. The attack was sudden and devastating. The tiger shark struck from the side, its massive jaws clamping down on his injured leg with crushing force. The impact knocked Christian off his feet, sending him tumbling in the deeper water. The predator's attack was relentless and indiscriminate. Tiger sharks are known for their tenacious grip, often holding prey while using their muscular bodies to roll and tear. The shark maintained its grip while striking with its powerful tail, creating a whirlpool of violence. What makes tiger shark attacks particularly horrific is their feeding behavior. Once they taste blood, they enter a feeding frenzy, biting repeatedly until prey stops moving. Christian fought desperately, but the predator's grip was unbreakable, and each movement only intensified the attack. I'll never forget Christian's story. On a remote Hawaiian beach, his screams echoed, unheard, as a tiger shark attacked. His truck, fishing gear still on the sand, was all that remained. He had vanished, taken by the very waters he loved. They found his body 4 days later, 8 miles down the coast. The community held a traditional blessing, and his surf shop colleagues started a fund for ocean safety. But these tiger sharks, indiscriminate in their appetite, aren't just a Hawaiian threat. Up the rugged California coast, even seasoned watermen aren't truly safe from these intelligent predators. I recall November 8th, 2017, in Fort Ross, Northern California. The morning fog lifted, revealing a dramatic coastline. It seemed like perfect diving weather for Ryan Walsh, a 29-year-old abalone diver. Calm seas, good visibility, a potentially profitable day harvesting those prized mollusks. Ryan was a professional through and through. 6 years in those frigid Pacific waters had weathered his hands and face. He free-dived to depths that would terrify most, driven by a relentless search for the perfect abalone beds. His friends knew him as methodical and safety-conscious. That morning, he launched his small boat with Marcus, a younger diver who looked up to him. They'd worked together for 3 seasons, developing the silent understanding that comes from facing shared danger in one of California's most perilous jobs. Ryan chose a rocky reef in 25 feet of water, a productive spot, but challenging. Strong currents, kelp forests, and the ever-present threat of getting tangled in abandoned fishing nets. As he suited up in his thick wetsuit, he felt that familiar mix of excitement and apprehension. The water was a bone-chilling 55 degrees, but he'd built up a tolerance. His dive bag held his abalone iron, measuring gauge, and collection bag, the tools of his trade. The first few dives went smoothly. He descended through the kelp canopy to the rocky bottom, where clusters of red abalone clung like living jewels. His practiced eye spotted the legal specimens, and his hands pried them loose with precision. But on his 7th dive, disaster struck. He was working to free a particularly large abalone when his fin became entangled in an abandoned fishing net. The nearly invisible monofilament wrapped around his leg, pinning him against the rocks as his air ran low. After a desperate struggle, he managed to cut himself free and make an emergency ascent. his lungs burning as he fought his way through the kelp toward the surface. He surfaced exhausted, disoriented, and dangerously far from his boat. He didn't know that his frantic movements had attracted the attention of one of California's apex predators. Great white sharks, living fossils that have patrolled these waters for millions of years. Perfectly adapted to hunt in the kelp forests where seals and sea lions gather, these massive sharks can reach 12 to 16 feet and weigh over 3,000 pounds. They possess an incredible sensory system, detecting electrical fields from meters away and tracking blood trails from half a kilometer. During autumn, mature great whites patrol northern California in greater numbers, following the migration of their prey. These sharks are intelligent, capable of learning and adapting their hunting strategies, making them unpredictable and extremely dangerous to humans. Marcus, watching from about 300 yards away, immediately knew something was wrong. Ryan was floating motionless, clearly in distress. Marcus started the engine and raced toward him. But the distance seemed impossible. A 13-foot great white had been patrolling the kelp beds when it sensed Ryan's emergency ascent. The shark's acute senses picked up the electrical impulses from his racing heart, the scent of abalone in his collection bag, and the erratic movements of a creature in distress, all triggers activating its predatory instincts. Ryan never saw the attack coming. The great white struck from below with devastating force, its massive jaws clamping down on his torso with a bite force reaching 4,000 pounds per square inch, slicing through his wetsuit and into vital organs. The shark's initial bite was exploratory, typical behavior with unfamiliar prey. But the damage was already catastrophic. The predator released Ryan and circled back, following the blood. I still remember the shock that went through the California abalone diving community when Ryan died. I can only imagine what it was like for Marcus, pulling his bloodied partner from the water. Despite his heroic efforts, Ryan was gone in 20 minutes, lost to massive blood loss after the shark attack. It led to new safety regulations and the kilo of the Fort Ross beds while biologists studied the great white activity. But as I've learned, the story doesn't end there. Hundreds of miles south, in the warmer waters off Florida, the same aggressive species that claimed David Walter was about to turn a spearfishing competition into a feeding frenzy. This time, it would unfold in crystal clear water, every horrific detail visible. August 14th, 2013. Perfect conditions graced Jupiter Inlet, Florida. The morning sun sparkled on the emerald Atlantic as gentle swells created ideal visibility for the annual South Florida Spearfishing Tournament. Alex Paul, a 33-year-old construction foreman from Miami, couldn't have asked for better conditions. He was a passionate spear fisherman, spending weekends free diving, honing his breath-holding and perfecting his aim. He wasn't a professional, but his athleticism and experience earned him respect. That morning, Alex joined 40 competitors at the tournament briefing. The target species were cobia, kingfish, and grouper, prized game fish. Alex had scouted extensively and identified promising spots. The competition began at sunrise, boats spreading across the area. Alex and his dive buddy Carlos headed to a productive reef in 30 feet of water, where bait fish attracted larger predators. The water was exceptionally clear, with 80-foot visibility. For 2 hours, Alex had moderate success, but as the morning progressed, he became focused on finding a trophy fish. Then he spotted a massive cobia cruising the reef edge. It was magnificent, easily 50 pounds. Alex hyperventilated to extend his bottom time, then dove to intercept the fish. His shot was perfect, striking just behind the gills. But the wounded fish immediately took off for deeper water. In his excitement, Alex became separated from Carlos and the other divers, finding himself alone in an isolated reef section. But bull sharks are opportunistic feeders with insatiable appetites, and multiple potential prey items only intensified its aggressive behavior. I can hardly imagine the horror of it, the water turning crimson. During a spearfishing tournament, a bull shark struck Alex, clamping its massive jaws on his leg. The attack was swift and brutal, severing major blood vessels. The shark's multiple strikes caused massive tissue damage. Alex fought back, punching at the shark's snout, trying to reach his dive knife. But the bull shark continued its assault with relentless determination, striking again and again. Other divers, alerted by the commotion and the spreading blood, raced toward him. They found Alex floating unconscious, his spear gun and the wounded cobia drifting nearby. The bull shark had vanished, leaving only devastating evidence of its attack. Despite immediate first aid and a Coast Guard helicopter evacuation, Alex died from massive blood loss during the 40-minute flight to the trauma center. The tournament was cancelled, and the spearfishing community mourned one of their most respected members. His death, tragically, led to enhanced safety protocols at tournaments. New requirements mandated closer proximity to dive buddies, and organizers began providing emergency response training. The association established a memorial fund promoting safer diving practices.